During my college days, 20 years ago now, some of my friends and I took frequent weekend trips to the mountains of North Georgia. These mountains were perfect when you wanted to smoke, drink, and commune with nature. This unfortunate incident happened over the weekend when me, my friend Bill, and his German shepherd Monty headed up to Sky Valley. It was the beginning of the fall semester at UGA, and not much had been done yet. We found a spot where the dirt road went back half a mile, then we would go another mile and camp near the river. There were plenty of trails, not to mention plenty of flat ground to set up camp on. Bill and I arrived at our place at 4 in the afternoon and started a fire. We were musicians, Bill the guitar player and me the percussionist, so we woke up and started screaming. Around 10, after a little snuggling, we chatted about life and girls before heading off into the night. It was a clear night, and we slept alone under the stars. It should be noted that during our other trips, there was no sign of other people in the area. Around 2 a.m., I was woken up by Monty crying. It was a deep guttural scream. Bill was still dead to the world, and I looked around and sat down to listen, thinking perhaps an animal had come into camp. The fire was just burning at this point, so it was hard to see, but I could hear distant sounds. Paying attention to the sound field, I saw a faint red flash, then another faint red flash to the left of the first one. It was about 100 yards away. My mind connected what I saw. A cigarette was lit, and they were getting closer. "Bill," I whispered, "wake up." Bill woke up, and I explained what had happened. At this point, Monty began barking as the strangers approached the camp. When we got up, they were in camp. A 70-pound German shepherd, now rabid. 2 great late 30s and early 40s redemption mofos were brought up to us. Bill told Monty to calm down. I will never forget the look on these guys. Skinny as hell, about 5'8" in tight shirts, scraggly beards, and 5 teeth between these 2 men, each with a large blade attached to their belt loops. "What are you doing here? Looks like you're having fun." We answered and told them to camp and have a beer. They asked if we had weed and we gave it to them. They looked around a bit and asked if we wanted to smoke with them. We declined, saying we left early. Throughout the conversation, Bill or I looked at each other before responding. Before they finally left, one of them said, "You will be safe here. You never know who you might run into, laughing as they go." We packed up earlier than expected. The thing that keeps me going to this day is that he wakes up just because he's with us. So I saw some things. Graves 50+ miles from the nearest access road. Shelter structures that are not suitable for human survival techniques. Maybe a Bigfoot. I think so. It was probably just a big fun bear. And animals cut deep in the forest without eating their organs or muscles, as if someone or something was doing it for fun. As I've said a lot lately, what surprised me the most and turned me into a believer was what I heard. The best experience I ever had was deep night in the Oregon forest. I'm going to brag about this in my introduction. Not to brag or anything, just to show that I live outdoors. I am 37 years old. I have been in the woods, hiking and camping for over 5 years. I went months without even talking to another person. I've taken every class or training imaginable in animal detection, especially threats that could kill me. I hiked most of the Appalachian Trail barefoot. I spent weeks in various deserts across the United States and Canada. I know what a mountain lion sounds like. Mating or fear or communication or whatever. I know what a fox, a wolf, an ox, and all kinds of birds, sheep, deer, all kinds of weapons, bison, insects, sheep, bears, and everything in between. When you're a hobbyist like me and spend every spare second alone in the woods, you have to know the sounds. It is important to know that what you want to eat is close by. And again, I only say all this because every time I tell one of my stories, at least one person has to say, "Nah, dude, that's a fox. They scream like bloody murder." Yes, I know that. So, I had 3 or 4 sounds that scared me, and they didn't match the animals that live in North America. There was only one thing that made me leave camp early and head back to civilization. This time, I made a buddy camp with my oldest friend. He is the same age and has more experience in the forest than I do. We met in Oregon for a 2-week camping trip around Mount Hood National Park. We were well off the beaten path, with no humans or civilization around us. And one night in our camp, we were sitting by the fire just reminiscing about the oxen. Needless to say, we were definitely smart. I drink occasionally, and I smoke occasionally, but never on these trips. Your sanity and level head can be the difference between life and death out there, so that's something I don't do. As we speak, perhaps 300 yards or so away, we heard a scream, yell, or scream that went on for like a few minutes, and it literally shook our heads how loud it was. It was guttural, booming, and the only way I can describe it. Imagine a big horror movie with endless twists. Imagine some great, powerful demon, and now imagine in that movie, the demon is somehow defeated and sent back to hell. Imagine the demon's screams of anguish and rage. It was horrible. I mean, two grown men with decades of experience, both of us carrying firearms for protection, who could take down a 1,000-pound bear if need be, in hysterical tears, clinging to each other, wondering what to do next. We made it to the first signs of the day and booked the donkeys to the checkpoint and got the hell out of not only the area, but Oregon as a whole. I'm now at the point where I can talk about it again. I never went monster hunting either. It was always about my love of nature, animals, and solitude. Over the past few months, I have been fascinated by unknown voices through my own experience. I never went out with technology other than a mobile GPS and an emergency satellite phone. My next trip is coming up in May, and I recently invested in some solid recording equipment, a FLIR camera, and a solid digital video recorder. On this next trip, I'm actively spending time recording what I hear. I live in a very small town, and the house across the street from where I lived was constantly changing its people. There must be 3 families who have moved out within 2 years. Generally, my family kept to themselves and didn't really get to know our neighbors, so we've been talking to each other, but other than that, no contact. But the family that stood out the most was the 3rd family that lived there. The only reason we're talking to Gerald is because he got a new mailbox and replaced ours with the original mailbox at home. Ours was really badly damaged. We thought he did it because it looked bad and the mailbox was on the lawn. But one day while my father and I were playing outside, Gerald was working in the yard, so my dad wanted to thank him. As she got closer, I realized she had a puppy with her. I, then 15 years old, immediately started asking when my father and Gerald started talking. But when they finished, my father came to me and told us that we had to leave. So we went home, and later that night I heard my father tell my mother that Gerald was acting out. Fast forward a few months, and I'm a very light sleeper, meaning I wake up as soon as I hear a scream from across the street. I was still half asleep when around 2 a.m. I stumbled on the window. I look and see nothing, so I just go back to sleep. About an hour later, I wake up to sirens, so I look out the window again. I see an ambulance arrive and several police officers arrive. I'm very worried, so I'm watching what happens. I see that Gerald has been arrested. I see his wife being put in an ambulance. After that, several black cars came and took away the whole street, and eventually, I go to sleep knowing I have school the next day. The next morning, I get up and go to school. As I wait for the bus outside, I realize that everything is normal. Very normal. I go through the school day and don't worry too much about it, thinking it's just my overactive imagination giving me weird dreams or something. After school, my mom told me she saw Gerald on the news. After he called the police, he was arrested for tying his wife's head with a sled. I was definitely surprised. My dream is more than just a dream. I woke up to the sound of cries for help. I never told anyone that part. The woman never came home and people came and took all her things. I hope he survives, but I'm not sure. It took a while for anyone to stay in the house, and eventually people came and lived there. Like I said, I don't know what the outcome was, but it still bothers me to hear these screams. For a bit of context, I was 16, and it was pretty simple back then. When I was in the 6th form working in a supermarket, I had to take the bus from where I lived to work. Also, the buses were terrible for being on time or arriving. So I waited at the bus stop with my coat and umbrella in the horrendous rain, but I was still completely drenched. Suddenly, the door of the house near the stop opened and 2 young men came out and told me to stand on the open porch. It had no walls, only a few pillars holding it up. I thought, well, Why not? They're pretty good, so it doesn't get any more wet than I'm in shape. They also seemed like really nice guys, and I started talking about how the buses were always late and they agreed. Then we talked about how they run a business or what they do with some kind of decoration, and they started asking about my work. I told them funny stories about people working there or customers. They asked if things were lost or stolen or not noticed at all, and I said I know people who got guns and things but didn't have a stock, but the way they stored it was crazy. Basically, the loading bay was always full of anything from food to electronics or whatever. In retrospect, I was completely ignorant, but I thought it was just a good conversation. So my bus was running 20 minutes late, but hey, I was dry now, so it was cold. The guy started saying things I don't remember, but we can take you to work. You can open the back door so we can get some stuff and no one will notice. You can come with us. It's a really big house. At this point, I wondered how many holes I had dug myself. They know I don't have a car and they know where I work. And I was pretty sure I couldn't outrun either of them. I finally gave the excuse that I don't have the keys to the back door, and I can't live here and I have a house with stuff. But they wouldn't take no for an answer. Also, I remember both of them working around, forcing me to go back to the rain. One of them tried to grab me too, but I managed to get away and started to help. At the happiest moment of my life, the bus stopped at the same time. I ran to the bus and shouted, "Thank God you are here," and told the bus driver to take me away. I've never been so scared in my life, and thankfully nothing has happened since. I never reported it. Hell, I didn't even tell my parents. I probably should have, but to be safe, I never used that bus stop again. This weekend I went on a trip with my boyfriend and some of his friends. 5 of us hiked a 10-mile-long unpopular mountain trail to a small popular lake. We saw 2 couples coming down, but no one passed us. Tracking is not easy and wildlife is common. We even saw a swamp about 3 miles away, so we were all on the lookout for more mountain or mountain lions or anything that might cause trouble. After the swamp, we ran into a small snow 100 meters from the trail. We walk another 20, 30 yards through the snow and find a deer rib and spine. We gather around him, and without much ado, one of the guys swings him around with a stick, and he's completely clean. When we get up, an older guy is standing about 10 feet away, just looking at our group. Surprisingly, none of us heard or saw him walk. It seemed to just appear there, and after we made eye contact with it, it turned right, jumped a small creek, cut through 18 inches of snow, and ran down the side of a mountain, disappearing into the tree line, making a lot of noise. We never saw the guy again after that, though how did we get there without feeling or hearing anything? This is beyond me. I spent most of 2011 and 2012 living on an old farm in New Hampshire. The house itself needed some renovations, but other than that, it looked like a New Hampshire farmhouse. This is the Zillow farm description. Listed there on the New Hampshire Register of Historic Places, the Burley homestead has been in continuous family ownership for over 200 years and retains the original character of the residence since it was built around 1760. Parts of the house were remodeled in the early 1800s. Back onto the lot beautifully, a side porch invites you to the door through the gardens. A central chimney reflects various fireplaces in most rooms and a large cooking fireplace with hearth in the country kitchen. The sitting room fireplace is surrounded by early paneling, and the mantelpiece reflects the Federal style period. Front foyer features wide pine flooring, large entry door, captain's staircase to second floor, 3 bedrooms, updated bath and back room with loft access. 2 great barns for the hobbyist, home business. Many original features, barn and more. This is a unique opportunity to own this special home. At first, it was a wonderful experience. 5 of us, 2 sisters, my mother, my father, and I were all very happy with the size of this house. We lived there for most of my childhood, and most of them were small, so seeing the whole area was just a dream. As you enter the foyer, you're greeted by the kitchen in the far distance, and this white door next to the sink. A white door led to an extension of the home, a small carpeted room with a washer and dryer inside. Surprisingly, when I updated my home visuals, I noticed that Zillow and many other sites did not include this extra laundry room or anything in the backyard. I always had a weird feeling about this room the first time I walked in, so I usually stayed away from it. I lived on the top floor with a window facing the front of the house. About a week to live there was normal. My sisters and I were in school, my father drove a truck on the road, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom. One day, as I was grabbing something to drink, my mother asked about this strange figure outside the window inside the laundry room. I didn't notice at the time, so I went inside the room and looked out the window. About 10-15 feet away were these strange stones, and they seemed to be pointing in a certain direction. Ironically, the laundry is aligned with the window in front of you as you enter the laundry room. I felt relief inside me. By this time, I had seen my fair share of superstitions in life and didn't want to be ruled by anything. I felt awkward around the room. The carpet I was standing on was not properly attached to the floor, as if something was covering it, and under the rug was a hardwood floor with a large painted circle that took up most of the laundry room. It was a red and blue yin-yang with a few strange stars inside. Some, later discovered, turned out to be planetary symbols. All are lined with stones in this yard. I remember there being other rock formations, but nothing this weird. At the sight of this symbol, it seems that the house is covered with a coat of negativity. My mother was horrified, my father was not at home, and both my sisters and I knew that it was a ritual or prayer room inside the house. And I still know nothing about that. In fact, it may have been here since the 1800s. Over the next few months, things began to move around the house and take a turn for the worse. Things will magically disappear. My night terrors were back in full force. The energy in this place was bad. I even remember my mother having it. My mother, sister, and I were sitting in the kitchen in the afternoon. Mom finished making herself a sandwich, and we all have a lot of fun and talk well. Mom went into the laundry room and moved the clothes from the washer to the dryer, but when she opened the door, darkness covered the sun. Then I felt this pressure in the room. When we left the hall, my mother became angry and suddenly became very angry with my sister. He was very angry. He raised his arms and literally made me fight my sister. Her deep hatred flashed in her eyes and reminded you that my sister is not a bad person. It was completely out of the blue. This went on for a few minutes before my mother, who was standing in the kitchen, came to her senses and asked what we were talking about. My sister and I were just the two of us in awe of what we saw and tried to explain it to her, and she didn't remember an inch. We all had a constant feeling of being watched. My sisters used their TV on nights like Mom, and I just slept in the dark. However, there was one night that honestly changed me. When I woke up, it was raining lightly around 2 a.m. I felt like something was watching me and urged me to get out of bed, sit next to him, and meditate. I don't meditate often, but I also don't wake up in the middle of the night with a sudden urge to meditate, so I just have to oblige. As I sat with my eyes closed, staring out the window in thought, I felt something watching me. When I opened my eyes, I saw this strange-looking white-faced thing with empty eyes about a foot away from my face. He also had cheeks that resembled a Chinese demon mask, the same look, only white, and this black void in his eyes. It only lasted half a second. I was completely speechless. As I was about to go back to bed, I heard a noise outside my window, and this gray-brown gargoyle thing with wings, and what I believed were dark eyes, though our eyes never met, never felt the twinkle. He pushed me out of the window and flew up into the sky and flashed away. I spent most of that night Googling to see if I could figure out what it was, but my results weren't great. The white-faced spirit in front of me looks like a Chinese demon mask when you look for it. I don't remember seeing the teeth. Most of it was peripherals because I was surrounded by his empty eyes. The winged creature honestly looks like a gargoyle, which is the only way I can place it. Whatever it was, this house, although spacious, historic, and beautiful, was an absolute nightmare and a hellish experience. I was not prepared for what I experienced there. It wasn't until a year later that I learned what pagans and Wiccans were all about. Protection spells and all that jazz. And with that knowledge, maybe it would help. Maybe it would make it worse. In October 1989, my mother and I spent a week in western North Carolina watching the leaves change color. A few years ago, we rented a cabin from a cousin of my brother's former high school band teacher who retired. The group director watched over the place. He lived down the street, but we didn't see him until Friday afternoon. The cabin was somewhat secluded, but it was right next to the main road. The group director had to leave for the weekend and informed us. He had a relative's number if we needed help. It was Friday afternoon, and by then the ride had been pretty bad. Friday night came, and we went to a church dinner down the road. It was dark when I got home. Mom began to wonder if we were the only ones on this road, and we didn't know where the nearest neighbor was, which was a little worrying. The moon was not full that night, but some light came upon it. Our cabin had separate rooms. On the way home from church dinner, the power went out in the cabin. Then my mother heard what sounded like footsteps, and she saw what looked like the outline of a hat. So there was a man walking near the cabin. Then we saw his hat disappearing into the woods, and at this point, we were both afraid that this man was going to come into the cabin and hurt us. We both wondered if they had actually cut the power supply. I decided to sleep that night on the bed in my mother's room. We tried to sleep, then we woke up to the cry of the owl. My mother could see the owl's eyes looking out the window. The drapes could not be closed at all, and he did not take his eyes off my mother all night. The nest shot all night. My mother tried to ignore the bull, but its presence did not scare her. The eyes really scared me. In the end, none of us could sleep because every noise woke us up. It will be so. What is it? Or what is the noise? And one after the other, we'd see the pattern of that hat again walking around the general area. Then he would go into the forest, and we both wandered about this time, but we could not leave in the middle of the night. Plus, if someone was there, it would be dangerous to go out there. There was no telephone in the cabin, and this was long before cell phones were widely used. The power finally came back on after a few hours, or so it seemed. By this time, we were in the wee hours of the morning. We were originally supposed to leave on Sunday, but we left at sunrise on Saturday morning. Let me start by giving you some background. I live in a big house and have 3 children. My now ex-husband and I built our house from the ground up 10 years ago. The old house was on the lot. We tore it down and built a new one. When we moved back then, I had only 1 child. I decorated the bedroom as a nursery, and it stayed there until I was pregnant with my second child, Max. Then we moved to the bedroom down the hall, which we decorated to look like a nursery and boyish. I never felt good about this end of the house, and tried to make sure this room was warm and cozy. There was a place outside this bedroom door that always made me uncomfortable. For more than 10 years, this place has been giving me goosebumps for no logical reason. At first, it wasn't a problem for my then 3-year-old, which honestly surprised me because I was expecting some adjustment time, but everything was fine. But after the first month, around 3 a.m., I heard her screaming in absolute terror over the baby monitor. This woke me up and I ran to her room. John stood on his bed pointing to the corner of the room. "A pirate, Mummy, a pirate," he continued to show. I looked in the dark corner but saw nothing. He pointed, wide-eyed. I didn't hesitate. I hugged him and brought him to my bedroom, and almost started the night with John coming to my bed at 3 a.m. While John slept in his new room, he would wake up scared. So I moved him into the nursery with his baby brother, which worked out well, and John's room sat empty at the end of the hall. Years. Then came the weekend. My husband and I went on a weekend and left the boys with my father and his partner Maria and the Indonesian women. His ethnicity doesn't really change. I'm trying to draw a picture here. Anyway, the first night after we left, I made a phone call. Maria immediately got on the phone and whispered so that Dad wouldn't hear her, and it was difficult to understand her with her panic and accent. But from what I can make out, he says that I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard John talking in the hall outside his old bedroom. It sounded like a man and a smaller boy. I thought the TV had been left somewhere, so I got up to turn it off. I heard the conversation from the hall. I walked down the hall and they started talking faster, even more so until I got to John's room. They didn't stop talking. They just whispered. He was very afraid. I could tell they were afraid to tell me because they didn't want to get mad, but they found it necessary to tell me. He also whispered because he couldn't explain it to my father. He would not be satisfied with such nonsense, so he waited for my call. Now I haven't told anyone about the hallway or John's room or anything until now. Maria's experience reinforced the fact that I didn't think there was anything a little scary about it. But fast forward 9 years later, my husband and I divorced. Not because of anything paranormal, but because of his secretary. Now, I am married to a great man. Things moved very quickly. My husband has moved. I never told him or anyone else at home how I felt. We got a sniffer and a rescue dog, and often the dogs would sit in the lobby, stare intently into the dining room, and then start barking in unison. The kitchen was under John's room on the first floor, and was where I always got goosebumps. It was a large, beautiful room with chandeliers, a fireplace, and a long table for 12 people. The dogs did this often, but only when they looked into the dining room. The dogs never entered the dining room except for the occasional kennel under one of our dining room chairs, but that's another story. So I guess it was FU for whatever organization was there. Otherwise, the dogs sat directly in the lobby, staring into the dining room for the longest time before they both started barking furiously at the same time. My new husband got a home office across the hall from the dining room. When I went downstairs, every light was constantly on. I asked him why, and he said it was because he felt like he was being watched in the dining room, and when the dogs sat staring into the darkness, it didn't scare him, so he liked to light the fire. Eventually, I became pregnant with my third child. John was now 10 and wanted his own room, so we converted the living room into his bedroom because he refused to go into his old room. Max stayed in the original nursery, and we were going to use the room at the end of the hall for the baby. I told myself I was crazy. It's going to be okay, it's a beautiful room. But I couldn't bring my newborn to sleep there. We decorated it especially for her, but in the end I said no. I couldn't bring myself to leave a newborn in this dark room. So she slept in the bassinet in our room and then played for a full year. Surprisingly, my husband agreed. He said he could feel it too and was hesitant to leave her in this room. I didn't feel like I was crazy, I must admit, but I also felt a sense of fear that my intuition was right. Finally, the time has come for the child to have his own room, so we bit the bullet and moved the baby there. We also hired a tutor to help during the day. She was a sweet Filipino woman, and one day I came home find a small glass statue of Jesus on the boy's bookshelf and a rosary on a bulletin board in his room. I thanked the caretaker for the small gifts, but asked them what had happened. He said it was for protection, ma'am. There is something very wrong with this room. I wanted to say little, but again I was filled with fear. He felt it too, and it reinforced that I wasn't imagining things. Amazingly, everything went well, mostly with the baby sleeping. The nightlight was very bright in the room, and I also lit the hall, which seemed to help. But one night, the same thing that happened 10 years ago with my first child seemed to play out again. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to my 2-year-old screaming in terror. I ran into his room, and he was standing in his crib pointing to the corner of the room where my other son had shown me years ago. A clown mummy. A clown, he continued to show. So it's not a pirate this time, but his vocabulary is very limited because he's 2, and I don't know if he can tell exactly what he's seeing. Also, he doesn't like clowns. But I mean, who does? But again, I looked around the corner and saw nothing. I was able to settle him down and he went back to sleep. But every now and then she'll wake up in the night, and I hear her say, "Go away," in her little baby voice, with anger. I don't see anything on the baby monitor, but it's located above her crib, not shown anywhere else in the room. Other things have happened over the years, like the TV in the basement being turned on a few times. Volume 4 is blasting. No one is using the TV in the basement. The weird thing is, I couldn't turn it off at first. The remote was not responding. There is also a mirror in the front hallway. I admit it's creepy in a way my 2-year-old doesn't realize until I point it out. I may post a picture sometime, but my 2-year-old says the clown is a mummy when he sees it. It's not a decorative mirror or clowns or anything, but if you look, you can't see why it's so shabby since it's an antique that the designer picked up years ago. Anyway, at this point, I don't know what to do, if anything. I tried the sage, prayed, and it seems to get better for a while. Then the weird stuff starts again. I love my house, and I'm used to dirty places, and now I live with it. My 2-year-old loves to play in his room during the day. though prefers to be downstairs in the arcade at night. This story takes place a few years ago, when I was a 17-year-old high school student. I would walk 25 or 30 minutes to school every day. There was a short path to take home, which took some time to walk. And as a nature lover, the short path was very enjoyable. Walking home alone, I would take this short route to enjoy the small amount of forest that is available in the medium-sized, moderately busy city where I live. My short walk was well-traveled, and I would occasionally see other people walking down the neighborhood streets or other students walking home from my high school or college. Sometimes, no one would be there, just me on the road. To give you some idea, the path is definitely not paved, but it is well-traveled enough that you can find your way through years of trampling. The short trail started off a busy road by my high school and entered a lowland forest with small ponds. A few minutes later, I was able to turn onto a street that paralleled the road up the big hill. One day, I came home from school a little late, asking for extra help. A few minutes before my shortcut, I saw a young man standing just off the main road, minding his own business and talking on his cell phone. An open backpack sat on the ground with his feet up. With overbearing parents and growing up in martial arts, I've always been a very cautious person and picked up a lot of details, especially as a young girl traveling alone. It was unusual because it is all lowland hiking, and there are many paths leading off the main road to different trails, as it is not a thick forest. Sort free for walking. Sometimes people would wait on the busy road for the bus stop. People don't want to stand in all the smoke when they're speeding. The only caveat I had was that I had seen her a few times that week, and I had never seen her there before. But yeah, maybe he was a college student or moved to the area, who knows. This time, the short ride felt different. Maybe it's because there's no one else on the road today, but I'm starting to get this bad feeling in my stomach. It's hard to describe everything, but most people know very well. Something was wrong. I was fine with my shortcut, and I decided to blame my feelings on being paranoid. This is not uncommon for me. I glanced at him, and out of my peripheral vision, he continued to talk on his cell phone and was unmistakable, so I continued on my merry way. I must have walked 20 or 25 meters when the guy got off the phone, and I felt an even greater sense of dread inside me. I see him bend over, the phone is gone, and I'm confused by some tissues and a brown glass bottle. Before I can take a second to register what he's doing, his head snaps to me, and the look in his eyes captures me, and I'm not stopping now. He drops everything, leaves everything behind, and starts beating me with straight hands and tissues. At this point, I am too far off the beaten track to see me in the woods with this crazy guy, and I'm too far to scream bloody murder. My first instinct, however, at this second decision, was to run towards my surroundings. I turned around and threw my heavy backpack on the ground and ran as fast as I could up the hill towards my neighborhood. By the looks of it, this guy could have split me in two, and I trusted my flight response more than my fight response. Besides, I didn't know what was in his hand. Fortunately, throughout school, I would be the best cross-country and runner from the women's and men's teams. My running proved to be my savior on a few more decent occasions, but I soon started chasing and knew it wouldn't be enough this time. This guy was fast, and I could tell he was taking it slow without looking back. Finally, I see him in the front yard with the fence, and I try to scream for help as hard as I can with my breathless, useless voice, hoping that people are coming home from work. I decide to start jumping fences in people's backyards. This guy's running skills are worse than his running. The first fence throws me off. The next yard to the next, he's on my ass, and I feel him come very close to grabbing my leg. At this point, I'm kicking myself. I see no cars in the driveway, no sign of anyone at home, and in my exhausted state, the only thing that keeps me from panicking and shaking is the thought of never seeing my family and friends again. The next yard is for people I know well, including their dogs. Also, a necessary background break. The house was close to mine on a parallel street, and I know their dogs well since I moved in recently. My friend hated the shortcut, and sometimes I walked with him from the hill to the street to school. This dog was huge and an absolute maniac, and usually when the kids went to school, they put him in the backyard instead of the front yard, because he would cry and scare the crap out of the kids walking by when he was tired outside. I love animals, so every time we passed, I would quietly talk to her about the threat that I would loose you with shells. Every time it would get a little worse for me, until one day the nice people who lived there gave me food. And then the dog became a nice stop on the way to school. The dog's name is Leo. I've never felt more hopeful than I did at that moment in front of the next yard and my new friend. By some crazy stroke of luck, they let him into their backyard one afternoon during work. When the lion saw me running towards him, he started to wag his tail. Then he looked at the boy who was chasing after me, and he started to growl. I thought this guy would be enough to leave me alone, but no. After I did, he started to jump over the fence, but the dog jumped, and his teeth came so close to his face that he fell across the yard on top of the donkey, and the jump fell back into the front door another yard. Jumping, we couldn't catch each other's breath for a few seconds. The dog barks and jumps madly at the fence. Perhaps he was evaluating whether or not he could take Lee. I prayed that there was no knife or anything in the jump. The guy looked angry before I saw the man, and after a few seconds he got up and started running towards the hill from where he came. I sat in complete shock for a few seconds and couldn't move until my hero started licking my face. I got out of there and ran to the back door and started kicking. They must not have been home, or they would have heard it fall. My house was really close now, so I jumped over the fence and ran the rest of the way and called the police to try and find the guy. I gave them the best description I could after coming face to face with him. The friend's bag was gone and so were his prints. They found my poor backpack in a dirty pool, and the police said they were looking for me. I never saw the guy again and never heard anything about it again. And after several calls to the office, I finally gave up. They told me they get sketchy reports during that time, people being chased and chased, but nothing like mine. There have been cases of missing persons, but not the worst and not the best in the city I've been in. You can never connect something like that. The more I think about it over the years, the more confused I become. If he tries to steal me first, why didn't he think of a better way to grab me and drag me through the woods before I had a chance to get away, or another stalker walked by? He had nothing on but a weapon or these rags, and what did he have in his hand? Friend. I thought it might have been chloroform, but I did a little research on it, and apparently the myth is that putting it in a cloth and covering a person's face causes them to pass out very quickly. Also, where would you get it? I live in Florida, and this happened 3 weeks after Hurricane Irma. My ex and I finalized our divorce in July, and I moved into a gated community where every house was rented by the same rental company or landlord. It's a very small neighborhood, about 15 houses up, I'd say. All 15 houses are bordered by man-made fences, with yards overlooking the lake. No one has a fenced yard. When you step out your back door, you can see the lake in front of you and your neighbor's yard. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed very close. Someone was always having family-friendly parties, barbecues, or people to watch sports and whatnot. I was depressed after the breakup, so I never attended these social gatherings. The only person I have is my next-door neighbor, Steve, a gun-loving Navy SEAL. Steve is the real hero in this dream. So my daughter Alice is 4, and I take her every weekend. Alice's bedroom window overlooks the backyard and the lake. I will spoil that girl to death. He truly is my everything. I count down to the weekend every week to be with him. So when Irma came, I was upset that I had to go almost 3 weekends without seeing her. He was with his mother the weekend before the storm. Later, apparently, during the weekend of the storm, he was with his mother. Besides, after the weekend, he was supposed to be with his mother, because I still had no energy. No AC in Florida is completely miserable. The humidity was so bad this week that I slept in my daughter's room all week, because she has the only room with a window overlooking the lake. I opened the window with the window screen open, so the breeze from the lake could cool the room as much as possible. Eventually the power came back, and Alice started coming back to me like normal. And that's when the nightmare began. My daughter complains about the singing lady and how she doesn't like her. I thought maybe he was referring to one of my old friends or one of the teachers at his school or something. Maybe she had a teacher at school who sang to kids she didn't like. That Saturday night, Alice awoke in the middle of the night to the screams of a bloody murder. I ran into his room and turned on the light, only to find him hiding under his cupboards. I asked him what was wrong, and he just pointed to an empty corner of his room and said, "Black, black, black." But there was nothing there. He acted as if he had seen a ghost. But after I calmed him down, he started talking about the singing lady again. "Please tell the singing lady not to come back. Please, Father, let him go." Obviously, he's having nightmares, right? I showed him there was nothing in the closet, nothing under the bed, nothing to be afraid of. He calmed down and went to sleep. I went back to the room and I quickly fell asleep. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before Alice ran into my room screaming, "She came back, came back." After this, Alice absolutely refused to go back to her room. I let him sleep with me. The next day, Sunday morning, I took Alice out to breakfast and we stopped by Target to pick up a baby monitor. I hadn't used it since her mother and I was still married, but I wanted to hear from her sooner, so that I could respond sooner if she had the dream again. After installing them, I showed Alice how they worked, and I can hear her, and she's fine. He slept very well that night, and honestly didn't look up all night. The following weekend, Alice had to stay with her mother again, because she had contracted a stomach virus from one of her little friends at school. It was Saturday night, and I was sleeping in my bed around 2 a.m. A woman's voice hums a soft nursery rhyme over the baby monitor. As the sound got closer to the monitor, the humming and soft singing grew louder. I certainly wasn't dreaming. I heard a woman singing softly in my daughter's bedroom. To be honest, I have never been so scared in my entire life. I felt a mixture of pure terror and disbelief. Then came a voice. "Alice, sweetie, are you awake?" Adrenaline shot through my veins. I jumped out of bed and locked the bedroom door. I grabbed my camera and called my neighbor Steve. He didn't waste a second. When I got off the phone with him, I heard him yelling from the back door, "Don't move!" And I ran outside and found my daughter shooting a woman sitting outside her window. The window I left after Irma never closed. Steve quickly dropped his guard when he recognized the woman. "This is Jean, the maid next door." Steve's wife came running after him and confirmed that it was him. Jean said she played dumb, didn't sing, and didn't even know my daughter's name. He said he was by my daughter's window because he did his weekly patrol for the guards, and I saw him approach his house from the lake, which is absolute bull, because I heard him sing. He called my daughter names. And yes, it's true that they found a few gates around. Yes, part of Jean's job was patrolling the lake at night. But at 2 a.m., I knew he was a bull. Although neither Steve nor his wife invited him, I could tell from his face that they didn't believe him either. The next morning, I went to Steve's house, thanked him, and told him exactly what had happened. She told me that Jean and her husband were a bit of a prick, but this was by far the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Steve then spent the afternoon helping me put the metal bars on Alice's window. So I am currently going through a very ugly divorce. I left my wife 4 months ago and moved to a house close to work. We have a 4.5-year-old daughter whom I have not been able to see for the past 4 months because my wife filed a restraining order against me. Nothing happened, it was just a breakup tactic. But luckily, he came to his senses recently and dropped the order. Now I share 50 with my daughter, which starts next weekend. So last weekend my mom came into town to help me build a city because, you know, I'm a guy, and guys don't have a sense of decorum, right? At least that's what Mom thinks. As for me, he's probably right, you know. We bought a twin bed for my daughter's room. He bought Frozen, his favorite movie, themed furniture and decor. We bought a bunch of knives to decorate the whole house. Candles, pictures, fake plants, rugs, these things. And we've done everything we can to make it even more homey. I kept the cat litter box in my daughter's room for the past 4 months before buying these new rugs and decorating my daughter's room. After setting up her room, I moved the litter box to another spare room, and although my cat didn't like the box being moved, she apparently decided it was her room and refused to use it at all. Trash after transfer. Instead, it hits all the new carpet when my mom and I leave the house. The weekend was spent with the two of us deep cleaning the new carpets with a deep cleaning product that would take a beating. I finally decided to put the litter box in my daughter's room until I could find a solution. And believe me, it's relevant. Fast forward to Monday afternoon. My mom's flight is at 6 p.m., so we leave the house, have a last meal, and I drop her off at the airport. I would come home around 6:30 p.m. to my newly furnished and decorated house. It definitely made me feel more at home. I didn't have any plans that night either, so I spent most of the night on the couch watching movies and drinking scotch. Around 11:30 p.m., I was really hammered and stumbled into my bedroom, closed the door, locked it because monsters and vampires, and collapsed on my bed, and I left immediately. But around 4:30 a.m., I woke up with the worst smell in my nose. It was so bad it made me snap out of my drunken slumber. It was like a combination of a cradle, a sweatball bag, and a trash can all rolled into one. My first thought was that the damn cat had taken another nap on the carpet. I ignored it, turned over, and tried to go back to sleep, but couldn't. It smelled bad. Finally, I got up and opened the bedroom door and looked around the room to see if he had left a surprise for me on the carpet. But it was clean. I looked in my daughter's room, and there was a good turd in the trash can, so the smell couldn't be my cat. At least not my name. Finally, I just squeezed it shut, locked the door, and fell back into bed. I lay on my bed for about 30 minutes staring into the darkness trying to figure out the name. Maybe it's all my cat poop and all the cleaning products I use over the weekend. I don't know. Maybe a pipe has burst somewhere. Did I forget to take the trash out to the porch and remember all the cribs we dumped over the weekend? But whatever conclusions I came to, none of them made sense. After 5 in the morning, I get up, go to the bathroom, and do my work. I browse Reddit on my phone for a few minutes, and then I flush the toilet and then fall back into bed. You know how the toilet beeps after you flush it? So I lay on my bed listening to the toilet drain cycle until it stopped, and I was in total silence. When I heard it, the sound of someone flying and clearing his throat, my closet. I don't know what happened, but I immediately jumped into survival mode. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, opened my bedroom door, grabbed my car keys, and jumped out the door and into my car. I started the car, backed out of the driveway, and pulled across the street into my neighbor's driveway. I flashed my high beams at home while I called the police. They were there within minutes. The police came to my car and I told them there was someone in my locker. I sleep barefoot, so the police thought I was a crazy drunk at first. But after arguing for 2 minutes, they went to investigate. They were there for what seemed like hours, and sure enough, they came out with a very thin, apparently homeless black man in handcuffs. They put the guy in the back of one of the cruisers and came up to my car to ask me questions. Apparently, when I dropped my mom off at the airport, this guy came in through the back glass door. He freely admitted that when he heard I was coming home, he jumped into my closet and searched the pawn shop for pills or papers. My name was his horrible B.O. coming from my closet 3 meters away from me. This man was at my house all night. What if I don't smell it and open my closet the next morning? Or if my daughter is there at night? The whole thought makes me shudder. I was playing poker on Sunday night and suddenly I felt very bad. Chills ran through me, but I didn't feel sick, drunk, tired, or even remotely physically ill. I suddenly needed to get home and make sure my mom was safe, so I took out my chips and left. Restlessness hit home for me, but I never thought it was anything out of the ordinary. I was late on Sunday and thought I had been dumped. The night was cold and still, but not as familiar as usual. When I got home, my mother was in the shower. He is an obsessive nocturnal cleaner, a habit his stepmother beat him to. I shouted to him that I was home, and he was relieved. I went to hang my winter gear in the window, and I saw her. We lived across the street from the park and floated down Sleepy Hill to my apartment. It was darker than the surrounding night and seemed to somehow distort the space around it. He moved with fluid and transparent agency, swimming like a squid through water, and I had never felt such terror. I knew I was seeing something I didn't know I was seeing. It was neither exciting nor exciting. It was terrifying. This was before smartphones, but trying to take pictures with a digital camera never crossed my mind. The truth is, I don't want to. I was aware of the fact that it was not friendly. I felt like I knew when I saw it something terrible was coming. Finally, I closed my shades and hid under the blanket like a little kid. I rested the next day, then the night, and a friend of mine came to visit. He told me the police were downstairs. He saw the look on my face and I told him what happened. He laughed. We went to get food. I asked the police what happened, but they didn't answer. We returned and found a young man wandering the corridor. He was a reporter and asked us if we knew where the woman in the building lived. We asked him if he knew what had happened, and apparently there had been a murder. A man shot his girlfriend and then took his own life. The murderer's mother lived on the other side of the building, and my friend was divorced. No, I didn't hear the footage and then fill in the blanks with an imaginary audience. I've been shooting guns since I was a kid and I know what they're like. No, I didn't watch a horror movie or have anything unusual on my mind. I have never seen anything like it since. I'm open to the idea of things I don't understand, but I also understand the importance of healthy skepticism. But I know what I saw, and even more, I know what I felt. It was like looking behind a door that should never have been opened. People think they want to see the supernatural, and maybe that's a good thing, but I think the truth is that most of us would be totally surprised if we encountered something that shouldn't happen in nature. Things like what I've seen go against everything we hold dear. We have a lot of walking in New Zealand, and sometimes I like to go for walks and bushwalks. Usually I go to one point and turn back, but tonight I decided to walk all the way. This particular track goes from the visitor center at the top of the hill, then down the hill to a path that takes you along an old abandoned railway line. Once used to display glowworms, it is now a rusty ruin. I decided to go down the highway, but it was around 4.30 and it was getting a bit dark. So I thought I'd do some research and then head back to my car. About 200 meters from the main station, there is an old tunnel used by the train. This tunnel was abandoned for 3 years, so I go into the tunnel with a small flashlight. The length of this tunnel would not exceed 500 meters, I would say. I swear I can hear someone breathing behind me as I walk, above the sound of the wet pounding my footsteps. I feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I stop in my tracks and turn around with a flashlight. But nothing, just a small ball from the opening of the tunnel. So I start walking again, and the feeling comes back. Then I heard something from my breathing and footsteps. No, someone. A man with a deep voice. I heard in a terrible whisper, "Come out." Well, I don't need to say it twice. I felt a large frame running through this small tunnel designed for a small train, and I heard footsteps behind me. The light at the mouth of the tunnel got bigger and bigger. I feel the safety of daytime washing, turning. I fell on my stomach while in the tunnel, and I felt like I was on my side. I tried to stand up, but my shoulders were killing me, and my legs didn't want to work anymore. Whatever it was, he didn't want me there, and he didn't want anyone there. I sank into the front mud. There seems to be some dangerous addition to the safety of daylight on pedestrians along the railway. I arrived at a small station and was able to board the long train. I sat there and tried to stretch my arm out so it wouldn't hurt anymore. Then I stretched my legs and looked up and, to my left, standing on the platform as if waiting for a train, was a young man in a brown top and a white shirt, looking dirty and disheveled. I looked back from my feet and turned to look at this guy again, and to my surprise, he was gone. I promise you, I'm a big frame guy, and I've never run faster in my life. Head up the hill, through the undergrowth, and back to the safety of the car park. And now I'm sitting in the car trying to process what happened. And in case anyone is wondering, yes, I can take pictures of this place, because entry is not allowed, but I will only come back if asked. A few years ago, my friend Jane and I took a trip to Portland, Oregon. We're both from the south side of Chicago, and Jane was very nice to the city. He was convinced that the West Coast was better, including the people. So we flew to Portland and rented a car named Veronica. The day before we were supposed to go home, we picked up Veronica and drove to Aberdeen, Washington to visit Kurt Cobain's childhood home. After that, we took a walk along the coast. We stopped in Astoria, Oregon to check out the Goney home and finished the day at Cannon Beach to check out Haystack Rock. All in all, it was a beautiful day. After dark, we decided to go back to our hotel, which was less than 2 hours away. I knew I needed gas, so I told Jane I would stop at the first gas station I saw. Cannon Beach is a small resort-type town with lots of shops and restaurants, but I didn't see any gas stations. Being from the city, I was used to seeing two on every corner, so I wasn't too worried. I expected to see you soon. I'm completely new to this area, so I continue to follow the GPS directions while talking to Jane. The next thing I know, we're not in any city, but on a dark road surrounded by trees. At this point, I'm a little worried, so I pull over to the side of the road to use my GPS to find the nearest gas station. It tells me it's about a mile down the road. Great, I'll get the gas and we'll set it up. So I'm driving and Veronica tells us we'll get there. I pull into a completely dark and empty gas station. We were surrounded by forest and darkness. As far as I can tell, nothing for miles around. According to Veronica, we have about 10 miles worth of gas, and the nearest gas station is 30 miles away. Jane and I are trying to figure out what to do when another car pulls up. I go about my business and ignore the other car. I think they need gas too, and out of the corner of my eye, I see someone motioning to me. After some hesitation, I open the window to see what they want. A middle-aged man and his wife were in the car. He starts asking us various questions. Need to hold? Coming from the beach? Heading back to Portland? I keep my answers polite but brief. He then tells us that he owns a gas station but doesn't make enough money to stay late. He tells us he knows Chevron 3 miles away and gives us directions to it. He gave us his number and told us to call him if we didn't. He says my name is Sam, a mechanical man. If you don't, let me know and I'll come and rescue you. We thank him profusely and then leave. Jane goes on and on about how cool it is in Chicago and how it isn't. I agreed. If it was weird, it was great. It's weird that he drove past the gas station at the same time we did, but whatever, I guess. You can joke about him calling his partner at the gas station. I'm sending 2 women your way. We make it to the spot, and this 18 or 19-year-old kid comes out to pump our gas. He asks us how we are doing and then says, "Yeah, there's a lot of weirdos here tonight." Jane and I look at each other and maybe laugh a little. "Oh, I told you so." You can go back to the child and ask what it means. He tells me this story about how his brother owes a ton to a drug dealer and how he hides it somewhere nearby. When he gets off his shift, he plans to take the crib out of it. I can tell Jane is uncomfortable with the strangeness of the night, so I give the kid a good tip and wish him luck and start driving again. At one point during our conversation, Jane calls Sam a mechanical man and leaves him a voicemail. He tells him we're making it to the gas station and how much we appreciate his help. I thought there was no need to call. That's what it was. But a few minutes later, we're on the highway, and about 10 minutes from the hotel, Jane's phone rings and it's Sam. "Thank you very much again." He asks her where we are and when we fly home. He tells her that he is Sam Glasty and that he wrote the book Badly Accused. He told us that we needed to study on the plane home, and it certainly piqued my interest. "Hey Jane, you'll have to look up that book to find out what it is." He Googles it and then just limps. It's like shaking. "What is it?" I don't want to scare you, but apparently he was accused of being the Green River Killer, and immediately he started going out because his number is now. Back at the hotel, we do some more digging and it turns out that the Green River serial killer victim got Sam off the hook. However, real serial killers have been caught and convicted based on DNA evidence. But at the same time in the 70s, Sam was convicted and served time for kidnapping and assaulting a young woman in our area. The book he wrote was about all that. We were stuck in Portland for 2 more days because of the snowstorm in Chicago. It was a strange, tense 2 days. Given the circumstances and strangeness of this night, things could certainly go very badly. And boy, am I glad that everything that came out of this night was a story. This was about 2 years ago when I was studying biology at university. I signed up for a trip to collect samples for an experiment that some students in the ecology department were going to do. This required collecting samples from several sites, so they enlisted biology, ecology, and forestry to help complete the project in a short period of time. The area my group was to sample was a few hours from a university in the Pacific Northwest. My group consisted of 9 or 8 students and a supervising professor. We arrived at the camp in the evening and pitched our tents. One of the other students brought a large container of split pea soup from home and shared it with others on the trip. I don't really care for split pea soup, so I declined the offer. Everyone was there except me, one of the students, and the professor. Come the next morning, the 5 students who ate the soup were not in good shape. They had food poisoning and were in no shape to walk 8 or 9 hours to collect the samples we needed. The professor supervising us initially came up with some rules, such as people traveling in groups of at least 2. We had to return to camp at night. But now, these rules have been dropped so that we can keep to our schedule and collect all the necessary samples. We are only told to do the best that you can safely do. That morning I went on a long journey. After about a mile, I ran into a stream I was supposed to follow. I had to go 4 miles upstream, stopping a quarter of a mile to collect water and soil samples. So I was in a hurry to get back before dark. Halfway through the day, I realized it wasn't going to happen. About 2 miles in, I stopped for lunch and sat on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was really peaceful until the smell of cigarettes. It's not the smell of smoking, but the smell of a heavy smoker's car, where the color of tobacco has been left to ferment for weeks. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. I thought the wind gave me the smell of some kind of hunter or hiker, but after a few minutes, the smell didn't go away. The vegetation in the area was not that thick, but there were plenty of places for ducks behind trees or bushes. I didn't give in to the fear. I must admit someone apparently hadn't said a word to me for so long. I quickly packed my lunch bag and continued streaming. Over the next few hours, the smell of cigarettes faded away. I smelled it again when I arrived at my last sample location after dark. By this time, the forest had become really dark. In retrospect, it was a really stupid idea to delay, as it would have been too dangerous to walk back to camp in the dark, even without smoking. After putting the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the dark forest, looking for who gave off the smell. I didn't see anything that caught my attention. In fact, I've seen so many things in the dim light that it could be someone sneaking up behind a tree or crouching under a leaf to see what's going on. I didn't like the idea of being in a dark forest with a stranger who would sneak up on me the second time without revealing themselves, so I started doubling it from the stream. I made much better time on the way back, and even though it was dark, I didn't have to stop to sample anything. But still, I didn't get back to camp until a little after 10. I was the last to return, but the professor was asleep. I didn't tell the professor about the cigarette smell because, well, he seemed tired and headed to his bed in the RV soon after I got back. I soon headed for my tent. At some point during the night, I woke up with my ribs. I decided to go into the woods with my business because I knew some students were still feeling sick and needed the RV bathroom for urgent matters. I walked about 100 meters into the forest, and what I saw next shocked me. To be continued.